Hello and welcome back to Technology Now, a weekly show from Hewlett Packard Enterprise where we take what's happening in the world and explore how it's changing the way organisations are using technology. I'm your host, Michael Bird, as Aubrey is away this week. Now, in this episode, we are looking at how humans can better increase our own awareness of cyber security, because even when the best cybersecurity practices are in place, it's still up to people to use it well. So how can we learn better practices, not only to defend ourselves, but also to understand and work confidently alongside the ever-advancing security tools and technology at our fingertips? And how do we not let it all get on top of us? So if you're the kind of person who needs to know why what's going on in the world matters to your organization, then this podcast is for you. Oh, and if you haven't yet, do make sure you subscribe on your podcast app of choice so you don't miss out. Right, let's get into it. According to a study by Stanford University and security company Tessian, which we've linked to in the show notes, 88%, that's 9 out of 10 employees, are responsible for making data errors that could compromise security. And that makes human error the biggest cause of successful cybercrime attempts, ahead of malware infections and ransomware attacks. The report, called Psychology of Human Error, found that more than half of the employees become victims of phishing emails because the cyber criminals have posed as a senior executive at their company. Other common mistakes include things like using weak passwords that leave them open to being hacked. One online security company, for example, carries out an annual survey of the most commonly used passwords. Every year since the start of the decade, the most used password has been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Except in 2022, that year it was password, all lowercase. Now, the report says that these take less than a second to hack. We've linked to the full piece in the show notes too. We've spoken on this podcast about how organisations and businesses can fight cybercrime from an IT point of view. But what about the people doing the day-to-day jobs in offices and workplaces? We are only human after all. We're flawed and we're fallible. So are we the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain? Well, to answer that, we're joined this week by HP Cybersecurity Awareness Training Programme Manager, Joanne O'Connor. I guess an element of cybersecurity is the human psychology. So actually, like, cybersecurity isn't necessarily all about the whiz bangs in your data center, the security appliances, the secure applications, whatever it is. Like, where do humans fit into it?
Humans definitely play a very, very critical part to it. But firstly, we definitely need to establish that humans are indeed not the weak link. That is like really a trope that has proliferated over the last, probably 10 years. I'm sure it helps sell different cybersecurity awareness products, but also I think it can just panic companies because it's in the media so much. But like really, if you flip that and you view your workforce as kind of a mini army that are educated and informed and ready to take action, if they see something suspicious, then you're in like a really strong position because of course humans make mistakes. But what you don't want to do is have like a culture of like it's victim blaming essentially. People should not think that they are the problem, they failed, that they're weak, that they let this thing happen. Because really this then, it can create a culture of fear and shame, and really it can potentially discourage employees from reporting incidents or seeking help.
Can you talk through some of the challenges when it comes to cybersecurity and I guess like interacting with users?
Yeah, absolutely. Like a really overlooked area, in my opinion, is user experience plus cybersecurity. Really, this links back to having different sort of mindsets and people with different backgrounds in the industry because they can bring different expertise and a viewpoint. And I think that if you're not thinking about how employees both receive education and are assisted and enabled to, let's say, report phishing, secure their accounts and devices with things like MFA or encrypt their emails, you're potentially losing your audience because you can have, technical teams deploying amazing technology, but without like proper communication as to why it matters to the employee and how it's going to help. And then ensuring it can be implemented in a short few seamless steps with like a really simple user interface, then you're just not going to see the uptake you need for it to be effective. So the challenge of the intersection with security and user experience is really about balancing robust security with user-friendly design. Because when you have complex authentication processes or reporting mechanisms, all you're going to do really, you're risking frustrating your users to the point that they totally check out.
Is there like a scale that we have to think about? Whereas like one side of the scale is don't have any security, make it as easy as possible for users. And on the complete other end of the scale is make it as hard as possible, which keeps, your infrastructure and your network incredibly secure, but it makes everything a challenge to get into. Like, is it trying to find a happy medium between those two elements of the scale?
Yeah, there's the happy medium. And I think it's trying to have either your super technical teams or someone within that team who's looking at it with their user focused goggles on them. And, it makes sense because sometimes either an organization might have money to buy a tool. And the way it is, people want stuff implemented super quick and it's nearly the last bit at the end. It's like, oh, can someone test this just super quick and make sure that people can use it and it's user friendly. And all of a sudden they figure out it's like a 25-step process. It takes people 4 days and kills a breeze. They don't do it. So definitely there is absolutely a happy medium. But I find it interesting that I don't see or hear much of how users experience security. It's how security wants security to happen. And that's kind of it. And I feel like we definitely don't have enough conversations where we either test with users, we have a group of people outside our domain. I talk to my parents all the time about having a password manager. And honestly, you can see their eyes glaze over. And I'm trying to explain the why part. So really, having conversations and really having users understand the why is so important.
So I'm a millennial. I grew up in the world of the internet and I was acutely aware of cybersecurity when I was a teenager and growing up. And so now my generation are properly embedded into the workforce. Do you think that sort of education has become easier over time, or is it still really hard to get people to care about this sort of stuff?
That is a really interesting question. I think they probably are aware because if you're even taking things like social media, usually they'll at least, know that there's 2FA and MFA and to try and lock down their accounts and their passwords. For example, my parents' generation, their take more so lean to, sure, who's after me? I'm not very important. I don't have anything they would want. And when you see so much negative cybersecurity messaging out there, I think you can become very desensitized to it and nearly kind of tell yourself that, well, they're after big companies, they're after people who have lots of money, and what's my little password and my email account going to do for them? Let me just close my eyes and my ears and just get on with my day and pretend it's never going to touch me.
Yeah, that's really true. So can I ask you about the psychology of cybersecurity and what can we do to encourage people to engage and I suppose take personal responsibility for their own security from a cybersecurity perspective?
Yeah, the psychology of cybersecurity is very interesting. And really when the cybersecurity awareness industry came about is that it absolutely relied on fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It is an acronym called FUD. And it was used to motivate users to take action. And like while fear can be a powerful motivator in the short term, like it tends to be ineffective in the long run. And fear can sometimes jolt people into action. Really using that fear-based messaging for cybersecurity engagement is not a healthy approach. And you can easily bombard employees with scary statistics and horror stories about cyber attacks, hoping that it's going to scare them into compliance. But like I said, what ends up happening is that you get overwhelmed, desensitized, and ultimately disengaged. So instead of instilling fear, organizations should focus on empowering employees through education, transparency, and that user-friendly security measure that I talked about.
Is there any sort of nudge theory or positive reinforcement? Is there any of that sort of stuff involved to try and encourage people?
Yeah, there is actually. I believe that the key to fixing it really lies in the power of what is called social proof, that humans are heavily influenced by the actions of others. And yes, when attempting to influence others, social proof can be like really like a highly effective tool. And instead of focusing on fear and what can go wrong, we can start by highlighting all the positive security practices that employees are already engaging in and then showcasing them as an example to follow. So, yeah, for example, if 99% of employees have completed cybersecurity awareness training, you say, let's celebrate that achievement and use it as motivation to get the other 1% on board, framing it as that come join the club of, security conscious employees. And then you're tapping into that psychological principle of social proof and the idea that people are more likely to adopt a behavior when they see others doing it.
Joanne, thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. And we will be back with you in a moment, so do not go anywhere. All right. Well, it is time for Today I Learned, the part of the show where we take a look at something happening in the world that we think you should know about. And this week, we are saying goodbye to a fusion experiment that was built 40 years ago in Oxford in the UK to harness the energy that fuels the sun and stars. The Joint European Torus, or JET, began operating in 1983 with the aim of studying the science behind creating and maintaining fusion reactions that would be needed inside a future power plant. And in February 2024, a European research team at the plant broke a world record when it succeeded in generating 69 megajoules of energy from just 0.2 milligrams of fuel. And that is the largest amount of energy ever achieved in a fusion experiment. But when Britain left the EU, it also left the European Atomic Energy Community, which has funded the running of JET until now. The EU, along with China, India, Japan, Korea, Russia, and the United States, is now building ITER, or International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, which is being built in the south of France and will be the world's first commercial-scale fusion machine. So, for all we are bidding farewell to some remarkable history, the future of energy is looking bright, and with a lot of research, hopefully carbon-free. Right, now it's time to get back to Joanne O'Connor. Hi again, Joanne. So let's talk about manipulation, because humans might not be a weak link, but they can be manipulated, and hackers are experts in that. So how do they do it?
So attackers aim to manipulate human behavior by triggering specific chemical reactions in the body. They can induce sort of fear to triggering that fight or flight response by, let's say, telling you that your bank account has been emptied, which releases stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. But on the opposite side, they can also stimulate a dopamine release to create a sense of reward or satisfaction. They know how to basically hijack those chemical reactions to get you to do something, which is generally click a link or download something. And I think when people understand how their emotions and then their chemical responses to those emotions work, you can then layer on additional learning to explain how cybercriminals leverage those emotions for their gain. And there is an evolving and emerging area being coined cyber mindfulness, which is an interesting merging of two industries, the cybersecurity industry and then the mindfulness space. I think there's three elements to it. The first one is understanding your personal responsibility to security as an employee. The second one is understanding some of the basics of mindfulness. So that kind of being present, focusing on one task at a time, not jumping between tasks or doing something when you're on a call. And then the third one is understanding the tactics used by attackers to hijack your thoughts and social engineer you to make you panic and put you into that fight or flight response. And that last one is key, because if I notice that my heart rate is increasing and I'm starting to panic for something, I understand this response might warrant me stepping away from my computer, taking 5 minutes and just reevaluating my next step, if it was an email that I received, because I'm aware of those three elements are all at play.
And I suppose it sounds like maybe what we're talking about here is like you finish the day and an email comes through at 8 o'clock at night, and it's an email that you're sort of not quite sure about, but you're sort of, have I done something wrong? Do I have to deal with it now? It's that sort of thing of like, take a beat, evaluate what's going on. You can take some time to properly read it and figure out, is this actually a real request coming from this person or is it not?
100%. And actually there's a term that some people use for it around having focus times, let's say specifically on your emails where you're most likely to come across, let's say, phishing. Some people call them email power sessions. You block time out, you do emails, and then you close that down. And I think we can get distracted, but adding in that element of, honestly, the mobile device is really interesting, because I think it's much easier to click on something on your phone, on a link, and even that could be accidentally. And that comes back to a little bit earlier about having that kind of culture of people being able to say when they've done something, either accidentally or on purpose, like I've downloaded a piece of software from the internet and I wasn't aware I wasn't supposed to, and now it's acting funny. And again, it's looping in things like psychological safety, which people talk about in respects of companies all the time. But really, that also comes into play in a security sense, because if I've done something wrong, or I feel like I've done something wrong, I need to be able to tell somebody, and then you don't get that cold panic, or at least you can get that cold panic and know you have a safe place to go to, which might be your cyber defense center or your IT team, and go, okay, I've done something, and you're not in trouble. It's actually really good to just tell them straight away.
That's a really powerful statement. I think that's probably possibly the most important statement, isn't it? It's like knowing that actually, if you just report it, you're not going to get fired or reprimanded.
Yeah, it's the old putting your head in the sand. No, the best thing to do is report it. And the faster you can get a malicious email to the team who can work on triaging it and eradicating it, the better. Like, they can pull an email from everyone else's mailboxes, so no one else, like, you might wake up in Ireland, and if I can report a malicious email and it's able to be pulled back out of 10,000 other people's mailboxes before America comes online, then how amazing is that I can do that? And that's the power that people have that I think sometimes they don't realize they have.
Joanne, thank you so much for joining us. And you can find more on the topics discussed in today's episode in the show notes. Right. Well, we are getting towards the end of the show, which means it is time for This Week in History, a look at monumental events in the world of business and technology which have changed our lives. Now, the clue last week was it's 1997, so let's spin up a groundbreaking home theatre experience. Did you get it? It was the release of the first ever movie on DVD, simultaneously with the release of the first DVD players in the US. Now, the film, a tornado-based disaster adventure movie, truly broke new ground in home entertainment. It was skippable, so you could scan through it. It had better picture quality and sound options over VHS. And best of all, the picture quality didn't degrade over time. Now, players had existed in Japan for a few months beforehand, with a scattering of movies available in more or less legitimate form. But this was the first big Hollywood release to make it to the format. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Hollywood was initially reluctant to adopt the new format as they were worried about its copy protection. And that wasn't the only teething issue with the format. The first DVD players were a niche market. Early machines cost hundreds to thousands of dollars, and with only a couple of titles available, it didn't have huge appeal to begin with. However, consumers and movie studios quickly saw the benefit of the new format, and within just a couple of years, prices had plummeted to less than $100 for budget units, and a home entertainment revolution was born. Now, next week, the clue is it's 1826, and on the inside, we were all bursting with energy. Do you know what it is? Well, let us know in a 5-star review on your podcast app of choice. Right, that brings us to the end of Technology Now for this week. Thank you to our guest, Joanne O'Connor, HPE's Cyber Security Awareness Training Program Manager. And of course, thank you to you for listening. Technology Now is hosted by Aubrey Lovell and myself, Michael Bird. And this episode was produced by Sam Dattapoolen and Al Booth, with production support from Harry Morton, Zoe Anderson, Alicia Kempson, Alison Paisley, Alyssa Mitri, Camilla Patel, and Chloe Sewell. Our social editorial team is Rebecca Wissinger, Judy-Ann Goldman, Katie Guarino, and our social media designers are Alejandra Garcia, Carlos Alberto Suarez, and Ambar Maldonado. Technology Now is a Low Street production for Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and we will see you at the same time, the same place next week.